Hello, everyone. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Public Programs and Events Manager here at the International Documentary Association. Nice to see you all again. As usual, I come to you today on the unceded land of the Tongva and Chumash people who have been stewards of this land for generations on the land currently known as Los Angeles. I'd like to thank our media sponsor, IndieWire, for helping bring our IDA screening series to you all today, along with support from KCRW. Now you all are on a big treat here to have a conversation with Jazz Tangcay from Variety with Dawn Porter. And it's just going to be great. And if you want to find more of our conversations and watch these films, you can go to documentary.org/screening series. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Jazz here. Hello, Jazz.
Hi, Cassidy. Thank you so much. Thank you to the IDA and IndieWire. I'm so excited for this conversation. I'm Jazz Tangcay, Artisans Editor at Variety. Dawn Porter's John Lewis Good Trouble covers more than 60 years of his social activism and legislative action and provides an in-depth and inspiring portrait of the legendary civil rights activist. So it is my absolute honor to bring out Dawn Porter. Hi, Dawn. Oh,
there we go. Hi, Jazz.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Thanks to the IDA and thanks to you for doing this. Really appreciate it. I love talking about Mr. Lewis.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited because I think, we've spoken about the way I see it and your work with Pete, Sousa, and Obama, and we've not spoken about this one. So this should be a great conversation. But I guess, as I said in the intro, he's been, doing this for 60 years, this was his life. And, before you sat down with him, what research or where did the idea to do this documentary come from?
Yeah, I had done this 4-part series called Bobby Kennedy for President, and one of the star of the show was Mr. Lewis. He told this story about volunteering for Bobby Kennedy's campaign, and he was a young man in his 20s volunteering for the campaign in Indianapolis. And John Lewis had organized a rally for the African-American community for Bobby Kennedy to go speak to people. And unbeknownst to any of us, that was the day that Dr. King was murdered. And so they got news of his death as Bobby Kennedy was about to leave for the rally. And Kennedy's older advisors, white advisors, were saying it's too dangerous, there'll be rioting, you can't go. And a very young, in his 20s, John Lewis said, you must go. They need to hear from you tonight. And Bobby Kennedy did speak to the crowd. He was the one who informed so many of the Black citizens of Indianapolis that Dr. King had been killed. It was well thought of as one of his most important speeches. It is the only time that he mentioned his brother JFK's murder at the hands of a white man, his words. And Indianapolis did not burn that night. And when John Lewis told that story about how he and Bobby Kennedy had this relationship, I thought, there are so many more stories like that to learn. So CNN came to me. They had a lot of success with the RBG documentary, which is a film I love also. And so, we always joke they were looking for another 80-year-old. So it was just kind of a really fortuitous. They wanted to do it. I wrote a proposal, and then off we went, started filming.
Wow. I mean, when you're sitting down with somebody like, Mr. Lewis, what research did you have to do? How much, because there's so many books, there's speeches. you know, like, where do you begin before you even approach him to say, I want to do this documentary with
Yeah,
you?
the one thing that I knew is that I wanted to marry the past and the present because, we started and so many people would think of John Lewis on that bridge, or,
Mhm.
maybe they knew that he was part of the Freedom Rides, or maybe, although very few people really focused on the fact that he was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington. Um, but I wanted to also point out his current day activity, and so I was really interested in this question of where do old civil rights workers go? What happens to them and how do they evolve and change? Because we all need to evolve and change, right? So I really wanted to marry the past with the present. So I read his autobiography. There's two main books about him that I read. I watched what I could, and then I watched a lot of like congressional record speeches, just to see and then we did like a timeline of, kind of legislation that he had been involved with. But then I think the part that was really the most fun, all of it was fun, but was really a lot of fun was going through the archive. And I work with just a brilliant archivist, Rich Remsburg, and he did all the Bobby Kennedy archive. And he was like a kid in the candy store, just searching for those pieces of footage that would animate the congressman's life over time. So we had a lot of fun with that. But Erica Alexander, who's one of the producers of this, Laura Michael Chizen is the other, and Ben Arnon. So Laura and I had worked together on Bobby Kennedy, but Erica, unbeknownst to me, had already approached Mr. Lewis about a film. And then she called, I was already doing development for CNN. And then she called and she was like, we're doing this film and we're wondering if I was like, okay, that's weird. Like we already started. And I was like, do you want to do it together? So we just kind of joined forces. So he was already like primed to do a film.
Yeah.
And so it just like we're always like, sometimes the documentary gods are with you. And this was one of those times. So it all came together really beautifully, and it was a joy to work with Erica.
Oh my gosh. You talk about him being primed. Like, what were the conversations you had with him, before you set out to start following him and filming him in his incredible world?
I told him I thought his message was really important. And I think he agreed. This was just before the 2018 midterms. It was like June of 2018. And he was doing a lot of his time was campaigning for other candidates. And so, we talked about that. I talked a lot with his staff about how this wasn't a biopic. It was really, um, a political kind of urgent message about the necessity for activism, the necessity of the protection of the vote. So I think, Mr. Lewis is just a very trusting person. So he was kind of like, okay, let's do it. Like he didn't need any convincing. I think
Hmm.
also at that age and with that, amount of activity, this was his life, like preparing people to vote and then assuring that they can do it legally and safely. That was his whole life.
Yeah.
So I think he kind of welcomed the opportunity to show people, what was at stake, and to show that he was still out there fighting for all of us, and that there was good in government.
Yeah. And you talk about how he was out there still fighting for us, still working, and we see that in the documentary. Like, you know, and he's so busy. How did you, that time that you had with him, like, how did you decide this is what I want to tackle, and then I'm going to use archive footage, I'm going to use photos for the rest of it, like
Um,
balancing that?
I mean, if I could have been with him every day, I would have, because he's just such an interesting person with a really full life. And I felt like there were parts of John Lewis that we didn't see very often, him at home, his art collection. I believe without any scientific survey, that he probably has the largest collection of original Jacob Lawrence paintings, Charles White's, in his house. And it was a side to him I didn't know, like how he really loved art and beauty and music. I knew a little bit about the music, but I didn't know he was such a huge art collector. Um, I wanted to like focus on some of the personal, parts of him, but also like kind of break down this idea that he was like a statue, like so many people treat John Lewis as if he was a person in the past. And I really, really wanted to focus on what he was doing now. So, we would work with his schedulers. It was really hard to keep up with him, like really, really, really hard, because he would fly home to Atlanta, on like Thursday nights, and then fly back to Washington, D.C. on Monday nights. In between, he would have a gazillion speeches. So we not only had to have his permission, but whoever he was speaking with, we had to have their permission. So I actually started with interviews with some of his colleagues, because I thought, like, what is their kind of impression of the congressman? And so Elijah Cummings, Representative Cummings, was the first interview that we did. And that really set a tone for the film. I mean, we didn't know that he was kind of ill at that time. And he was so busy. I mean, he was, the whip. I mean, he was like doing all this work for democracy. And he gave us this really beautiful interview, and that had like humor and, funny, like he talked about being mistaken for John Lewis, and like, and I said, Congressman, are you telling me you impersonate John Lewis? And he just had this huge laugh, and he's like, he didn't want to disappoint people who would point out and be like, Johnny, this is the great John Lewis. So he would take pictures with the congressman, which I thought was hilarious, but they were very good friends. And to see the amount of respect, but also love, that was really evident. And I think for men, and also for Black men, to be wholly embracing of their, love for one another and admiration was really important for me. And I felt like something I really was grateful to be able to show. So Jim Clyburn, same thing. Cory Booker, just lots of love in this movie.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, I love how you showed, like, Elijah Cummings, Cory Booker, and then you've got, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, like, and they, he ties them all together. And what was their reaction, when you asked them to appear and talk about how he had influenced their lives? Like, getting them too.
Yeah. Cory Booker was like, when can I talk? When can I talk? I mean, he loves John Lewis. And, but they all were really eager, these are really busy people. And they all not only made time, but they just really, I could tell they were very thoughtful in what they wanted to say. They really wanted to express. I could have filled the film with people saying nice things about him, but I really wanted to, first talk with his compatriots. So Sheila Jackson Lee, Elijah Cummings, Jim Clyburn, kind of the old guard, people had been around for a while. When Jim Clyburn, who was, also attacked during the civil rights movement, when he says John Lewis is the bravest person I've ever met, like that means something. But then I also really wanted to talk to the newer members of Congress, because those are the people he really identified with. He was that agitating, young guy who was pushing the establishment. You have to remember, like, the NAACP was not in support of the freedom rides. They were not in support of direct action. And he really felt an affinity with the AOCs and Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar. Like, he really wanted to encourage them, but he also, he was bridging that world. So Ayanna Pressley tells this great story, where she says the fresh people, they wanted to yell shame on the floor of the Capitol about some legislation. And Mr. Lewis is like, that's not how we do this. You know, really was honoring the decorum of the legislature. And I think that that's a really important message, is that you can criticize and protest and push, but there, up until now, has been a decorum in the halls of Congress where there's a respect, and that is how you get change. Like, you need that respect in order to move forward. And I think that that was a very important thing for him.
Yeah. How much time did you spend with him, following him around, and then, you know, sitting down with him to do the actual interview?
Yeah, we so in the field, we filmed him over the course of a year. So we went to Troy, Alabama with him, which was super fun. Then we went to his house in DC, his house in Atlanta several times. We followed him on the campaign trail. That was a riot. I mean, he had a police escort, and we became part of the police escort. And they were driving so fast we could barely like scoop up the camera, get in, follow him. He did campaign events at 5 churches on a Sunday morning. Like, he just was like boom, 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 just indefatigable, just did not stop. At one point, Tony Hardman, who was the DP that day, is a fantastic DP. And he's like a big, strong guy, and he's like, "Is he gonna take a break? Because I need a break." And I was like, "I don't know what to tell you. He's 80, and we can't keep up with him." So, so we did a number of shoots with him over the course of that year, and but all of that was leading up to the main interview, which we did in Washington D.C.
Yeah. Something that you did so beautifully, you know, in tying it to the present, was that it was a Trump-free zone. Like, you kept it focused on John Lewis.
It was a Trump-free zone on purpose, because we had enough of Trump. Like,
Yeah.
don't pollute my movie.
Yeah. How did you manage to like do that? Like, especially whether it was working with Jessica and like making that decision of like, we can talk about the current administration without having to show or having viewers hear it. And that I think is part of what kept it so hopeful and optimistic and beautiful.
You know, and I'm glad you mentioned Jessica Congdon, who's the brilliant editor of this movie. And we kind of decided we were both in the mood for, as long as it was true to the story, we were in the mood for something hopeful. And we had no desire. And there was, you know, Trump like famously tweeted at John Lewis, you know, nasty, negative things. So we had that footage, and we looked at it, and we thought about it, and we thought, Trump is the monster in the room that you don't need to see, to feel. Like, he is the dark force that we are fighting against. And so, you know, when John Lewis, one of my favorite things he does is we filmed him the night before the primaries, and he was speaking at Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is his church. And he says, like, it still gives me chills, the 3 civil rights workers who were murdered today are looking down on us. And it was like he was going to point to acknowledge a violent past, but not be controlled by it. And I felt like that's what we were doing in the movie, is acknowledging there was a dark force, but not give it more oxygen. We were giving oxygen to the light.
Yeah, I love that. And something else that was, you know, that also stood out was Tamara Kali's like score. She worked on Mudbound, for those who don't know, and she's an incredible composer. But the score here just gave me goosebumps. Like,
that was one of the most influential experiences of my life, to tell you the truth, in movie making. So met with Tamar Kali, watched some footage with her, but we had like a several hours long conversation about what does it mean to come basically almost from slavery to being in the halls of Congress? What does it mean for Black people, their attachment to land? What does it mean to know where you come from? John Lewis and his family had a very unique position in that they were able to save their money, sharecroppers, buy 100 acres of land in Alabama that they farm themselves. So he would always tell that story about his origins. You know, some people would like hide or minimize their humble origins, and he always put it front and center because he was proud of not only what he had accomplished, and this to me was like one of the differences with John Lewis is he wasn't pointing it out to point out how successful he was. He was pointing out how successful his parents were to be sharecroppers who could buy land, you know, in the 1940s like that, and that they still own the land, that they held on to it, you know, which was not easy. They had like a lot of kids who were farming. So Tamar Kali is African-American woman. She's Gullah Geechee ancestry. Her family also owns its homestead still, and it's been in her family. They fought really hard to keep it. And so she understood that connection. So she really like leaned in. I asked her basically, I said, I really want a modern spiritual. I want like to nod to the past, but bring it into the present. And she just ran with that theme. So at one point she's like, you need like field hollers. And I was like, yes, I need a field. I don't know what a field holler is, but like she did. And she researched, you know, folk songs of Black people working the land and, you know, that kind of research and texture. And then she re-recorded them herself with, so you hear her beautiful voice in the score, like, you know, the humming, and then she curated each voice individually. She just like, I wake up sometimes like singing her music still, like just, I don't have that skill. So I don't know where that comes from. But the depth that her score gave to this film is just like takes my breath away.
Yeah. There are moments where you know, Mr. Lewis is watching footage that he had not seen before. Were you aware that he hadn't seen?
No.
Oh my God. What was it like seeing his filming that reaction and like being in the room as he's watching this for the first time?
So we had filmed him, and we were with him. He does this pilgrimage to Selma to Montgomery to Selma. And we filmed him outside of Bryan Stevenson's Civil Rights Museum. So we were with him, and they don't allow cameras in the museum, which I understand. They want you to be present and not like on your phone or with a camera. So we were just kind of touring the museum with John Lewis. And we come upon this exhibit, and it has footage of him as a teenager doing something. And he's looking at it, and I'm watching him watch himself. And he said, I can't believe that's me. I can't believe, sometimes I just don't believe that's me. And there was this high school group on a tour, and he turns to this kid next to him and he says, you know, so that day, so can you imagine being a teenager and John Lewis is telling you about his moments, like protesting? And it just kind of, it clicked for me. Oh, if I show him this footage, I'll get that kind of deep storytelling. So, you know, the other thing is like with any film, and everybody who makes films will know this, you have to figure out the place and the space for your characters to access their memory, to tell their stories where they're not distracted. So for him in Congress, he was voting every half an hour. At home, he was literally like, my house is messy. Like he would be distracted. So we rented a theater in Washington, D.C. near his house, Arena Stage. And Jessica Congdon, the editor, and I made these purely archival, no voice sequences to show him. And we constructed these 3 large stages. And this is like total shout out to producer Laura Michael Chisholm, because I was like, I would like to rent a stage and build 3 giant screens and put the congressman in the middle in a darkened theater. It's gonna be really expensive. And she was like, okay. But so doing that, it allowed him to really react and respond. So sometimes it was interesting just to see his response, like when he sees, Lyndon Johnson say, "We shall overcome for the first time." Like he shakes his head, like that was so meaningful to him and to all the civil rights workers. Um, and then in the middle of that day, he says, we're like switching out something, and he says, "I'm seeing footage I never saw before." And also, like, this is where relationships in film matter, because like I film a lot with Keith Walker, who's a brilliant cinematographer, and like we just know, like, just keep rolling, like whatever happens. So that was during a break, and that he said that. And when Jessica and I looked at it, we were like, well, that was amazing. Like, we got to put that in, that he did that. So I think it gave everybody on the set chills. Is like, you could have heard a pin drop. It was completely silent, and we were all realizing what a moment we were having. And then later, after he passed away, his chief of staff told me it was one of his favorite days. Like the ability to relive some of that. The other thing it did, though, is that I realized very quickly, I didn't plan to have him address the camera, but once he
Mhm.
was doing that and I saw his face and the intensity, I was like, oh, he's got to fill the screen. John Lewis has to tell his own story, right? If you have been through what
Yeah.
he's been through, and I didn't want people to have the option of looking anywhere else. I wanted them to see his face and the passion that he still carries, not only for what he did, but for our country. Like
Yeah.
that is what his passion was for. And I just felt like that was really important. So, you just never know, like, if it's going to be goofy or if it's going to work, to tell you the truth. I was like, oh my God, this was so expensive. I really hope it's going to work. So it did. So I cannot say like, oh, I knew it was going to be amazing. I did not. I was like,
Yeah.
it's either going to work or it's going to be stupid and everyone's going to be mad at me.
The ending was so powerful.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's John Lewis, that close up,
Yeah.
talking to the camera. Was that easy to land on? Like, it's like, this is how we have to end it, like right here.
Um, it was, once we had it. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't know he was going to do that, you know?
Mm.
So that is the beauty of giving somebody the space to say what they want. Like, that's just like who he was. He was so optimistic. He like
Hmm.
he really believed in the goodness of most people. He really believed it. And you could see it in his face. Like I think for him, he really took such a long view of history that I think most people thought we were like kind of at the end of deconstructing racism. And I think he realized we were here. So
Hmm.
he could appreciate how far we'd come, but he knew what the road ahead was going to be. And that didn't upset him. As long as you were on the road, that was the point.
Yeah.
So I think that's why he could have so much certainty and passion and never tire of saying it's going to be okay. And so obviously, we made this movie before we knew that he was ill.
Yeah.
And so we finished it. It was like, it was like, yay. And I was fully anticipating, um, traveling with him and dancing with him and like all of it. You don't see like in the church scene, like we're all dancing. Like
Mm.
it was like really fun. And so it was really hard when he was diagnosed. In December. It was really, kind of like a shock. But I did get to show him the movie.
Yeah.
So that was a blessing.
Oh. Um, you filmed it. The world was a different time. It was a different place when you filmed it.
Yeah.
And then we had, the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement. Um, and then the documentary was released in June. Like, what did it mean to? I mean, this film could have come out at any point, but what did it mean to have it released in this, environment in the world? And like, voting rights is such, it's still it's the headline every single
Yeah.
minute. Like, what does that mean to be having?
Um, when I showed him the film, it was Valentine's Day. It was pre-pandemic, but there were, things were getting bad. And it was like cold in February. I just flew to his house and I just was like, all right, I'm just going to show you this movie on my laptop sitting next to you. And it's always, other filmmakers will say, like, that's when the rubber meets the road. The first time you have to show the subject the movie. And he had never, by the way, he never asked me a thing. He never said, how's it going? What are you doing? Never. He just was like, she'll do what she's gonna do. So showing him, like, in his living room when he was like ill, it was really, emotional. Like,
Yeah.
because we didn't know at the time, we were still hopeful that he could survive, cancer. But he just kept saying, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. Um, then fast forward to lockdown, to George Floyd, um, and then to his passing. Um,
Mm.
the last photos that I know of taken of John Lewis are he, was pretty weak, but he made his way down to the Black Lives Matter art installation in Washington, D.C. And to me, that is so Mr. Lewis, like, because he knew people were always asking, do you support the movement for Black lives? And he was like, I support all peaceful protest in support of equity and fairness. But to have him there in front of that mural with his arms triumphant, I felt like that is what we need in a leader right now. We need someone to confidently take our hands and say, we can get through this. So I always knew that this was going to be like emotional, but like
Yeah.
to have lost him, but to have him remain in film is like
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
meaningful.
How did, even watching that, like, you feel so optimistic, you feel hopeful because that's who he was and you capture that so well. But like for you as a filmmaker and just as a human being, like working with him, how did that inspire you and I mean change you too?
Yeah. It did change me. It did, and it still does, because these past few months have been hard. They're
Mm.
hard if you have a job and if you're not sick. They're devastating if, you've lost work or you have a family member or yourself are struggling. Um, I know that John Lewis was thrilled to see people in all 50 states in America come out and support, movement for Black lives and to support justice and equality. And not only
Mm.
in this country, but all around the world. And he saw that. His chief of staff sent me a picture of him like doing a thumbs up, even weak and in his last days, like doing that. Um, I while we were filming, sometimes I would say to him, oh, I'm so worried about so many things. Kids in cages,
Mm.
are standing abroad, like are people who are just on the margins who may not make it. And he would kind of say, like, focus the conversation on not the overwhelming darkness, but like on what he's like, well, what can you do? Like, and it was just this slight reframe that my husband jokingly started calling him my life coach because I was like, I'm not brave like John Lewis. I'm not facing the police, but I can drive somebody to the polls. I can help an
Yeah.
elderly person make sure their ballot counts. There's so many things we can do. And he was really, I think the thing that really moves me is John Lewis was not looking to be our hero. He would always say, I'm just trying to help out. He would always
Mm.
find, what is the thing I can do today and tomorrow? Keeping a long plan in his mind, but what is the thing I can do now?
Yeah.
And so that, like, I think is really helpful when we're living in such uncertain times. And I
Yeah.
think about that pretty much every day.
Needs to be printed off and framed somewhere, right? Like,
Yeah.
but as you were working on this, John Lewis, Good Trouble, um, you'd also just started working on The Way I See It, which is a look at Obama's White House through Pete Souza, and the documentary has aired this past weekend on MSNBC. You have an incredible insight into history through John Lewis, through Pete. What is that like, to have that incredible looking back into history that way, like for you?
Um, it's really grounding, it really, I think like a lot of what's happening right now in the world makes you doubt things you thought you knew. I thought the CDC was always trustworthy. I thought that presidents didn't violate the emoluments clause. I thought. And so I think we all need something to hold on to. And when you see the photographs of Pete, when you see Mr. Lewis's over 60 years marching and putting one foot in front of the other, and real progress gets made, it makes you think that this is a blip in time these days and not the forever. But it's like up to us to make it not the forever. And when you see what we had, you think like that's what I want again. I want a
Yeah.
leader that I can be proud of, and my children can be proud of. So I think it's really a grounding kind of experience.
Yeah. And I think the the documentary John Lewis, Good Trouble, is so inspiring. You want to go out. It's such an education. I think this needs to be taught in schools around the country because of what he's done. But if somebody wants to go out and say, I'm going to go off and watch this documentary or this, read this book, what would your recommendation be?
For another book, you mean for?
Yeah, on
Oh,
John
yeah.
Lewis.
I mean, I'm kind of obsessed with the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson right now. So I feel like we're in this moment when we're like, a lot of people are asking, why are we in such a racially tense time? And if we want to know that, we have to understand the history. And, one of the things I loved learning about John Lewis is how he and the other civil rights workers prepared and planned and studied. They didn't just show up on a bridge. They really thought about who they wanted to be and what kind of place they wanted to live in. And then they went and made it happen. And that is like awesome. He was 19 when he did the sit-ins in Nashville that desegregated a century of calcified segregation and violence. And those, they were following in the steps of the older people who were, in their 30s, but it was the kids who did it. And I think
Yeah.
like reminding the teenagers that they really do have that power, and that choice.
Dawn, it's always incredible speaking to you and hearing, your words. And thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you to the IDA, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. Yes, if you haven't seen it, seek out John Lewis, Good Trouble. It's so optimistic. It will give you hope. And the way I see it, you will be feeling left so inspired. So thank you, Dawn.
Thank you so much for doing this again. I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, let's do it again.